I think what we want to make sure is that the patient is engaged from the start. So if we want the patients to adhere to a medication, we need to understand what is the context in which that patient might be using that medication, what are some of the challenges they may have, what are some of the barriers or constraints they have in terms of being able to adhere. And if we start at the beginning in terms of building that into the development of the medication, in terms of the delivery of the medication, we don't have to worry as much at the end of the process in terms of whether the patient is well informed or whether we can actually convince the patient with education or other information that they ought to take that medicine. We've actually built their perspectives and built their needs into it from the very beginning.
Excellent. And how do you see the relationship between the patient and the pharmacist in that process? How do you see the role of pharmacists in mobilizing that process and in achieving that engagement?
I think the pharmacist is probably the most underutilized resource we have in terms of healthcare delivery. I mean, the pharmacist has a naturally good relationship with the patient, probably the most trusted healthcare professional when we ask patients. I think the pharmacist could certainly do a great deal in terms of not only informing the patients ahead of time, but also is probably the healthcare professional that the patient will see most often and will often be the first to know whether or not there's a problem in terms of adherence, whether the patient is actually taking the medications or whether there are side effects. So I think what we need to do is actually build a system in which the pharmacist actually has an expanded relationship. We know that in many countries and many jurisdictions where we have what we call that expanded pharmacist role, the pharmacist actually takes the job in terms of not only checking the medications but informing and working with the patients in terms of how they can integrate this into their daily life, but also with regard to other kinds of behavior modifications that patient needs to make in order to get the best use out of the medicines. Again, the pharmacist can take a very active role in it. We especially love the community pharmacists, sometimes the pharmacists that are in the drugstores or the pharmacists that are even increasingly in the what we have in terms of our chain food stores, because they will see the patients 2 or 3 times a week. And we have pharmacists who will step outside. Hi, Mrs. Jones, how are you doing? How's that working for you? You have any issues? That's an amazing opportunity to actually interact with that patient on an ongoing basis. The challenge is that if patients are not taking the medications appropriately, they actually can cause more harm than good. So that's an important factor already. I mean, certainly if patients are taking what would be expensive medicines, there is an obligation to the whole system that the patients actually use those medicines appropriately. And we believe very strongly that patients need to accept that as a responsibility. In many of our countries where public health is in fact seen as a right, patients oftentimes will not necessarily value what it is that they're being given. So I think we need to do a great deal to make sure that patients understand the value of what it is that they're getting. So yes, we do believe that patients need to get the information, get the education and the support, but ultimately the patients have to be responsible. And certainly we would say that from a safety point of view, from an efficacy point of view, from a cost effectiveness point of view, patients have got to be accountable for their use of the medicines appropriately.